Dr. Jeremy Weiss here. I'm founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders and how they overcome big challenges in life and business. Today, we have one of the legends of technology and business, Nolan Bushnell. Nolan founded both Atari and Chuck E. Cheese Pizza. He's been inducted into the Video Game Hall of Fame and was named one of Newsweek's 50 Men Who Changed America. He started more than 20 companies and is one of the founding fathers of the video game industry. His latest venture is called Brainrush, that uses video game technology that incorporates real brain science. He hired Steve Jobs back in the Atari days and is the author of Finding the Next Steve Jobs, How to Find, Keep, and Nurture Talent. Nolan, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Good fun to be here.
You know, I listened to that a few times before we talked, and it's a must listen to. I listen to it, must read, and I want to ask a few questions about that. And I don't think we should divulge the answer, but one of my favorite parts were the riddles that you include in there. And anything that starts with 3 women in a bathing suit. And I don't think we should reveal what the riddle is. People will have to read it or listen to it to find out what that riddle is. But that is a good one.
Book.
Yeah, that was a good one.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I want to hear about, obviously talk about the Atari days, the Chuck E. Cheese days. I want to hear about recently or lately. So I want to know what your favorite game you ever produced, past, and then present at Brainrush.
I guess the game templates. Brainrush is more about a template that can teach anything.
Yeah.
And I did a game called the template that is called Sequences, where anytime the order of something is important, that is the template to use. And it turns out that a tremendous amount of education is about what's the order, grammar, even spelling, chemistry, a lot of physics, tremendous amount of mathematics is ordering objects and sets. And so I felt that was kind of a neat thing to have a general purpose tool that would allow that kind of learning.
Yeah. So what about your favorite past games that you've produced?
I think I really was happy with Breakout, and that happened to be the one that Steve Jobs did with me. And so, I did the primary architecture, and Steve and Jobs and Wozniak basically did the articulation on the hardware.
So tell us, what was it like working with the two of them on that project?
Oh, great fun. Steve was always a real giggle. Steve was one of these guys. If he liked you, there was no one more charming, no one more fun. Wozniak at the time was very, very shy. If I'd ask him a question, he'd just stare at his feet. Right. But Jobs and I became kind of a friend. I mean, Isaacson's book told me that Jobs considered me one of his big mentors.
Yeah.
I hadn't actually realized it before the book.
Oh, really?
I just kind of thought we were friends and we hung out. But as my wife says, I'm really clueless when it comes to picking up social codes.
She loves you anyways. But what was it like when you first met Steve? Because you hired him.
I actually didn't. Al Alcorn, my head of engineering, hired me. But he made himself aware to me very quickly, and I was always in the engineering lab. And so, he came into my office one time with a grandiose plan, and, we developed a friendship.
Did you know at that time that he would become what people know him today?
Of course not.
No.
No, I thought he was an extraordinary human being, but I always thought he was a little bit, I don't know. I didn't feel like he had the common sense to be a good CEO. And I think that was as much to the fact that he was 19 and 20 years old
Sure.
as
Yeah.
it was anything else. Nobody has common sense at 20. But more than that, I mean, I clearly didn't see it. Otherwise, I would have taken him up when I was offered a third of Apple Computer for $50,000, which I turned down.
I read about that.
I regret that.
Why did you turn it down at the time? Because you would have owned a third of Apple.
Yeah. I mean, we'd have been diluted. I wouldn't have been at it now. But I think it was two or three reasons. One, I wasn't sure that he was a great businessman at the time. Second, I know that we were at Atari starting to think about doing a personal computer at the time, and I thought there would be a conflict of interest.
I see. Yeah. So I always like to include a fun fact. And a fun fact about you, Nolan, is, I mean, there's a number of them. You like puns, you go snowboarding, but you have 8 kids. So, yeah, can you tell us a little bit about raising 8 kids and how you incorporate the entrepreneurship spirit in them?
We were a family of projects. We were always working on things. And I gave my kids access to, I had a little metal shop and a little, carpentry shop. I'd let them do anything that they couldn't cut their fingers off on.
Right.
I had to be there if they could cut their fingers off.
Yeah.
We had an electronics lab, and then off in the corner of that there was a chemistry setup. So that I mean, this was serious stuff: Bunsen burners and retorts and diffraction grading, diffraction elements, and and so all the kids grew up knowing how to use those tools. And kids don't know the difference between toys and lab equipment.
It's toys to them, yeah.
And so they always thought that it was fun to go up in Dad's lab and make stuff. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, blow stuff up.
I'm sure your wife loved that.
Not too much.
No. So you grew up in Utah. What were some of the entrepreneur projects you had from a young age?
Well, I was a ham radio operator, and I started very young. I wired up all my friends' house with a wired telephone system that I created using speakers and wires and batteries and stuff like that. I had probably the first speakerphone in Utah. I mean, my mom was always afraid because in those days you weren't allowed to even put your own extension, unless it was there. Of course, I figured out how the phone company could track it, and so I disconnected the ringer because they could test the ringer, and if there was too much impedance, they knew you had an extension. So I had 3 extensions in my room.
That's funny.
And but to give you an idea how crazy it was in those days, my friends had all come over, and since nobody knew about a speakerphone, one of us would get the guy's girlfriend on the phone and talk.
I knew girls would be involved. Yes, yeah.
And so that was all kind of cool. Oh, one thing that I did, I covered my ceiling with burnt out fluorescent lights that I got down behind the grocery store.
Okay.
I mean, literally covered the ceiling.
Sounds dangerous, but go ahead. Yes.
Well, what you do is you wire them all in series, and then you ground one end, and then you hook your other end up to your big long wiring antenna. Mm-hmm. As soon as you have a lightning storm, your whole ceiling flashes every time, just with the induced electricity.
Jeez.
That's cool.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. What were the lessons you learned from your parents? Because obviously you had this inventive entrepreneurial nature from a young age.
Well, my dad was a contractor, and so we always had, the wood pile and tools, and I had a very rich environment of tools. I mean, we weren't rich; we were just middle class. He was a cement contractor, and my mother was a school teacher. But later on, when he did his own business, my mom kept the books, and it was a family business. And I think the main thing was that it wasn't so much learning from them as much as the fact they tolerated my eccentricities. I mean, how many parents would allow their their 12-year-old to put a red and white striped pole on the top of their house with a flashing red light on top for an antenna pole. I mean, there's not a lot of
Not
parents,
many, no.
not many, And so I think I'm looking back on that and I'm saying,
Yeah.
My parents were really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So what did the early days look like of your career? Because I was reading, one of the big things that surprised me with the research was that you were towards the bottom of your class, which I would not have expected.
Well, I always took school a little bit with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
I was more interested in what I wanted to learn rather than getting the particular grades.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the classes I thought were stupid.
Yeah.
and a lot of times I'd get interested in something and I would be sitting in a classroom for which I wasn't signed up for instead of going to the one that I was signed up for, and just stuff like that.
Yeah.
Plus, I always put myself through school. And so I worked very much, when I became manager of the games department at the amusement park, my spring quarter was really, I had to be there probably 50 hours a week. And so that would tend to cuts into your schools.
Yeah. So then what were you doing right before Atari, before you started Atari?
There's two phases. I graduated in college, came to Ampex, which was a pretty cool company at the time. First, they invented slow motion video, the first videotape recorder. And then I worked on this thing called Space War, which turned into Computer Space and licensed it to Nutting. So I went from Ampex to Nutting. And then Nutting was kind of a screwed up little company, and that gave me the confidence to go out on my own and start Atari. Yeah,
I remember hearing you say, seeing the people running it and it was successful, that you could, that you didn't call them not smart, but that you saw these people were running it and you could do it too. Was that one aspect that you saw that made you kind of launch out on your own?
Absolutely. I mean, they were not just not smart, they were buffoons, and when, you say, gee, they've got a company and they're doing everything wrong, and yet they're still making payroll and doing all this stuff. So I think that in Silicon Valley, one of the sort of the Silicon Valley cultures is almost everyone who's worked there has sat next to somebody who went off on their own and did well. Yeah. And I said, gee, I know that guy. He's not any smarter than I am. I can do that.
Right.
And I like to say, Nutting was I thought they were buffoons. Jobs obviously left me. He must have thought I was a buffoon at some level. So it's karma.
Well, he has you as a mentor. He considered you a mentor, and you didn't consider the other people mentors. So a little bit different. But so what was the early days of Atari like? What did you do first when you got it started?
Well, the thing that people don't understand is that there was no real venture capital for us at the time.
Yeah.
So so every day was a scramble for cash, and we were able to finance Atari by building product with parts that we got on 30, 60, 90-day terms, turning it into a product really, really fast and selling it for cash.
Right.
And so we had cash for the product plus the margin long before we had to pay our bills. Mm-hmm. And so we funded the company on accounts payable. And we invented just-in-time inventory before it had been named.
Yeah. I mean, you still had to produce things that people wanted. What was that creative process like when you were creating those things for these companies that you were selling?
Well, the real creative process then was heavily bounded by what we could do.
Yeah.
The technology was very difficult, and it didn't have really extremely high resolution. But the screens could not be busy. They couldn't have a lot of elements to them. And so we would constantly try to figure out, the creativity was, what can we do given the limitations that we have?
Right.
And then how can we remove some of those limitations with better technology? And so we were kind of pushing both threads all the time.
Yeah. So how did you originally meet Al Alcorn?
Al Alcorn worked for me at Ampex.
Oh, okay.
He was on a work-study program with Berkeley, and he was an engineer at Berkeley, and they had a thing where you'd work in industry for 6 months, then you'd go back to school for 6 months. And just to add that, Steve Bristow, who was the other big name in Atari, was the other half of him. So he would be my tech for 6 months, and then Bristow would be my tech for 6 months. And they ended up being vice president of research, vice president of engineering for Atari, and were brilliant guys, both of them.
Yeah. So, Nolan, how fast, Atari grew super fast. How fast did it actually grow?
Went from, it grew super fast in those days. In the internet days, I think we've been exceeded many times.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
But we basically went from a stub year of 3.5 million to 19 million to 38 million to 104 million.
Wow. And with that, you have to hire tons of people. How do you manage that growth with people?
We really hired almost anybody we could, and then we'd fire the bad ones. We called it rotating to excellence, and we'd give everybody a chance that we could, because there are some people who are really good employees, but really horrible interviewers. And
right, yes.
And the other part about it is we didn't care about degrees. If you're smart enough, that would be good. One of the prime designers of the Atari 2600 was a high school dropout. And, like companies like Google and Facebook and those are now just catching on. They don't even ask if somebody's had a college degree. They're just looking for what the person could do.
Yeah. And you had an innovative way of looking at culture. Can you tell people a little bit about the culture at Atari and what you did?
Well, it was really about a meritocracy, and that I said we are going to focus strictly on outcomes, not process.
Yeah.
And so you can wear what you want, you can come to work when you want. You don't even have to come to work. Just get your project done, and I'll be happy. And then we'd jump through hoops to make sure that people were happy, and then we'd celebrate. We had the Friday afternoon beer busts on the loading dock, and they were just, that was the reward, and we partied a lot because, everybody hit quota.
How do you've strong, in your book, you talk about it too, you have strong personalities like Steve Jobs and other people. How did you, manage that with all the other employees?
Well, whenever you have, not everyone is a social being. There's a lot of people that are abrasive, have bad, social habits, bad social skills. And yet if they're capable people, you want them on your team. So I would cloister them. I'd figure out, another building, a back room, in the basement.
Right.
In Steve Jobs' case, I created an engineering night shift, which previously didn't exist. And so he was the only one on the engineering night shift. But I was being a little tricky, because I felt that, I knew that he and Woz hung out, and Woz was a savant. You could tell that immediately. He really understood technology at the time like no other. And I knew that Woz would work at Hewlett Packard and then come and hang out with Jobs at night. So I thought I was getting two Steves for the price of one.
Right. Yeah. So did he officially work there also, or was he just there? No, he didn't.
He didn't.
Well, so you really did get two for the price of one. So what made you decide at the end to sell Atari?
I was tired. Like I said, we were constantly chasing cash. I've often thought that if I'd have just taken a 2-week vacation, I wouldn't have sold. But it was just getting difficult. And then, I was a farm boy from Utah, and all of a sudden I could sell and have more cash than I ever thought I'd have ever in my life.
Right.
And, you say sometimes you hold them, sometimes you fold them.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened after you sold with Atari? And I want to talk about Chuck E. Cheese a little bit too, but I know that Warner Brothers bought it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they really were monofocused in a lot of ways. And I hadn't realized that when I sold them, but they really didn't care that much about the coin-op business. They really didn't understand it that well, and they didn't understand technology. They thought they were in the record business and that the cartridges were the record of the future. And it had record kind of margins, it had record kind of marketing programs, what have you. And they didn't realize that while it took 40 years to replace the 78 RPM with the 33, and then another 20 years or 45, and then another 20 years to get the 33 RPM record, and then that the game technology was moving so quickly that they really needed to upgrade the hardware on a much bigger standard than they did. And, they just didn't grok to them.
Yeah.
And remember, Chuck E. Cheese was started inside Atari, and they didn't want it. And so I bought it personally. So they did me a big favor that way.
So what are big mistakes people do make with video game companies that you maybe have made or that you've seen these other companies make? Because obviously you had a thriving company, and you'd think a big company like Warner Brothers would have the wherewithal to make it launch further.
They didn't understand enough about the technology to understand that Atari didn't. Usually companies get killed by competitors.
Yeah.
Atari got killed by a total lack of understanding and hiring people that didn't understand games, didn't even play games themselves. And so there was no resonance with the business. And when it crashed in 83, their ego said, "Oh, the business must have crashed. It wasn't us." It wasn't us, because obviously we're the smartest guys in the room. And so therefore, but what can we do when the business just goes away?
Yeah.
And what they really did, they saturated the business with 2600. They tried a couple of feeble attempts at upgrading it, but it was the wrong product. And there was a lot of confusion in the market because Atari was the leader, and all of a sudden they were in disarray. And there was the winter of discontent in 83 where everybody thought the business had gone away.
Yeah.
And then Nintendo came back and said, "No, it hasn't."
Right. So Nolan, after you sell, what was that like? Like you said, you're a farm boy from Utah, and then you build up this company, huge growth, and then you sell.
It was delightful. I mean, I bought a 15,000 square foot house in Woodside, fixed it up, and started looking for a wife, and found one and filled the house with kids.
You surely did that. So what was the beginnings of Chuck E. Cheese after you bought it from them, right? Or like a pizza chain?
I started it inside Atari, and the idea was our coin-op games, we were selling them at the time for about $2,000, but during their life, they'd take $30,000 to $50,000 in coin drop. So it didn't take a rocket science to say we're on the wrong side of this equation.
Right.
But I didn't want to compete with my customers, so I said, I'm just going to create my own venue where I'll have a place for young kids. The other issue was it was a marketing issue that we knew that young kids had a high desire to play video games, but there was no appropriate venue for them.
Yeah.
Video games weren't really in restaurants at the time. They were sort of in bowling alleys and bars.
Yeah.
Neither of which were the appropriate thing for an 8-year-old kid.
No.
And so created a family entertainment center, filled it full of video games and kiddie rides and pizza.
Yeah.
And it worked like a charm.
I like the tell me what the original name that you thought was good. Of Chuck E. Cheese. Yeah, but after that, there was another name after Coyote Pizza. With rat in it?
Rick Rat's Pizza. Yeah, that wasn't... everybody was horrified with that one.
What were some of the challenges with Chuck E. Cheese? Obviously, it's a household name.
I think... there were... Compared to Atari, Chuck E. Cheese was pretty easy. The challenges were learning how to manage big geographic diversities. I used to say, when you're chairman of a multi-chain restaurant, it's like the kid in the back seat with his little steering wheel. He's driving and he's driving and he's driving. It's not connected to the wheels. And that's what it feels like when you're CEO of a thing. How do you drive and have it connect to the wheels when it's in Omaha?
Right.
And you feel, and you realize quickly that the linkages between command and control and the units in the field is very, very loose and very wobbly.
Yeah. So how did you do it? Because I could see like Atari and Chuck E. Cheese
they were local,
much different.
Much, much different. Well, we, I would wish that we'd had Skype in those days. We'd have conference calls, and that was a help. But in those days, conference calls were expensive. I can remember having a conference call that cost the company almost $800.
Wow.
Just
as much as getting on a plane and going over there.
Well, no, it was multiple people though. It was a conference, but it's funny to think about how things that we take advantage that were clear is free are now
right. We take it for granted, the technology for granted. It seems like you're ahead of the curve on all these technologies.
Yeah,
so you have to get that. Go ahead.
I'm going to just unplug the phone. Oh no, I'll just do DND. I forgot about that. There we go.
So with Chuck E. Cheese, when you look back, and Atari, you look back, what was a couple big lessons that you learned that you bring to Brainrush?
Well, I think that the main thing I try to learn is that how do you market into new places? And schools are probably the most noisy environments or frictioned environments to sell, because highly bureaucratic. They really are afraid of making mistakes. They're very backward thinking, not forward thinking.
Right.
In general, you're looking at the most innovation avoiding segment of the population that you could. And so it's represented a very big new challenge to me, because usually if you have a product that's the best in the market, it just flies off the shelf.
Right.
Not only now you not only have to have a great product, but you have to bribe people and jump through hoops I could spend my whole life speaking at education conferences, that are full of people who are educators, not a decision maker in the place.
Yeah.
Not one.
Yeah. So how do you get traction with Brainrush? Because that is the market, right?
Yeah, that's the market. You just keep plugging at it, and slowly you get some help. One of the things that's slowing it now is schools are really having trouble getting the technology right and deploying tablets or Chromebooks. For example, you get a great big, 20 gigabit pipe into the school, and then 3 kids start streaming and they shut the whole thing down.
Right.
So how do you keep the kids from streaming on that?
Yeah.
And it's just,
there's a few things that don't get mentioned a lot in the interviews that I want to ask you about. Is Cadabroscope.
yeah.
Tell me about that. That I read that it sold to Lucas and was sort of the beginnings of Pixar.
That's correct. Well, I had this idea that computers were going to take the drudgery out of animation.
Mm-hmm.
And so we bought at Chuck E. Cheese. We bought a PDP 750, I think it was 780, and it was a pretty hot scientific computer at the time. And we bought some core software from New York University because they had a little project on computer-assisted animation, and we worked on it for probably close to 2 years, and got to really understand what it was. And one of the things we realized is that to do graphics at the time was so computer intensive that even though we had a very hot computer at the time, it was not nearly hot enough. Like a lot of times it was taking us 12 to 15 hours to render a single frame.
Wow.
And you say, oh yeah, that's not.
So do people have it too easy these days then? Like you compare those days to people today, and the people today maybe are complaining about certain things. Do we have it too easy now?
I'm sure that there will be people that, no. I mean, people have it a lot easier. They can do things now. The number of MIPS, I mean, I didn't foresee that we'd have gigahertz processors. That just seemed too fast. It seemed like there were some speed of light things in the problem. There's no question to me that we're going to have quantum computing that's going to make our current things look slow.
Yeah. I want to hear what you think is next on the horizon, because it almost always seems like you're too far ahead of yourself. Is that why you end up selling that with the Cadabroscope? You were just too far ahead?
I was too far ahead for the amount of cash and time that I had.
Yeah.
I realized that it was one of those things that was going to take a lot of cash and a lot of time before it could be profitable. And I didn't feel like it was an appropriate thing for Chuck E. Cheese to do at the time.
Yeah. I want to hear about what you think is next, but another kind of too far ahead of yourself, you had a Catalyst incubator.
Correct.
What were some of the cool things that came out of Catalyst? And I think without you, my wife and I could not get around because we have horrible senses of direction, and you had something called ETAC.
ETAC was the first automobile navigation company, and
when was that? What time frame? What era are we looking at?
1983 was when it started.
Yeah,
and we ended up. In fact, if you use Google Maps or anything, it's all using our core software,
right?
That we licensed. But we did that. We did one called Buy Video, which was probably the first online shopping. Even though they were kiosks in airports and things that you could order on the screen, and the order would be sent in by modem, 1200 baud modem. So it was not online, but it was kind of close to being online.
Yeah,
we did a we came very close to creating a chip that would allow for we thought at the time we could do a 50-cent video screen using a liquid crystal projection technology. And we got it working on a small scale, and then we just decided that to get it from there into the market was going to be too much, so we kind of shut that down. Then I did Androbot, and Androbot that was a big problem because I fell in love with it. I just knew there had to be a robot, and we sold a lot of them. And
why was it a problem?
Because the unit that we thought was going to make the breakthrough, we just could not get it to be reliable. And, a 50-pound robot rolling down the stairway onto somebody.
Crushing them, yeah.
And crushing them was not a good idea. And there were a lot of things that would cause the computer to crash, technically. If you were rolling around on a carpet, you'd pick up static electricity. The static would jump across the bearings of the wheels. That would be enough EMF to shut down the computer, to crash the computer.
Yeah.
And we tried putting the whole computer in a Gaussian enclosure and a Faraday cage and all that. Just could not. The noise immunity of chips now can handle it. The noise immunity of the chips in those days just couldn't. So,
yeah. So what were some of the big lessons? Was that one of the first incubators?
I think so. Well, the big lesson with an incubator is you should have a 2-year and out philosophy. That there is no startup that cannot be fixed with a little bit more money. And unfortunately, the walking wounded, you can't always tell whether it's the wrong market, the wrong team, the wrong product. And so after a while, all the good companies have moved out, and all you've got left with are these walking wounded. It's kind of like, the day of the incubator zombie. Boom.
So, Nolan, what's next? What should people start thinking about or looking at? Because, what's next in the horizon?
For me or for the world?
Yeah, for you and for the world, yeah.
Oh, I think I'm going to be doing a new kind of amusement park. I'm going to call it a micro amusement park. Think of a Sears Roebuck that's gone out of business, and it's at the end, and there's all this square footage that's available. And think of it just full of Bushnell crazy stuff. That's
Wait, does that include Sun as well?
Oh yeah,
Brent too. Yeah.
Well, I've got 5 sons that are involved in some level of technology.
Oh, really?
And my
Okay.
daughters as well. So it'll basically be mentored by my second daughter. The PR is going to be handled by my first daughter. All the money we make is going to be handled by my third daughter, and the tech is going to be from the boys.
So what's next for the world? Because it seems like you're always one step ahead with Atari, the robots, Pixar, ETAC. What's next that people should be looking at?
I think robots are going to be very, very important. People have talked about them, but when I say robots, I'm saying little guys that are rolling around your house and doing stuff for you. That become a member of your family.
Yeah.
And I think that probably the biggest social impact will be the auto drive cars. It's just around the corner, and the Autobahn.
No pun intended.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The Autobahn just made them legal, so now you can have pilotless cars and trucks on the Autobahn, and Nevada has said that they're legal. Yeah. I think the sharing economy is going to continue to pick up speed. Uber, Lyft, Airbnb. I think those things change an awful lot of existing structures. But the real impact on life will be the auto drive car, because it'll get rid of congestion. You'll be able to get home hammered.
If they're at one of your parties, that's important.
Right.
So, Nolan, since it's Inspired Insider, I always ask about the lowest point and how you got through those tough times, because people just see you now after, being the father of video games, Atari, Chuck E. Cheese. It wasn't always an easy journey. What was the lowest point, and then how you pushed through?
I think the lowest point was when I did some personal guarantees, and I was basically underwater financially, and I ended up having to sell the Woodside house, and I had all these kids and everything, and
scary.
And I wasn't destitute, but it was a thing where the kids were, between 4 and 20. And I was concerned about their lives actually more than mine, because going from living in this 16,000 square foot mansion with a water slide and a lot of goodies to a rental in Palo Alto wasn't going to work.
Right.
And so I decided I was going to take everybody on the long-awaited trip to Europe for a year. And we could do it very cheaply because I had friends all over the world that had always said, "Oh, come and stay." And so we spent 4 months in London and a month in Scandinavia. Now, that doesn't sound like a low point. But just before that, we made that decision, it was pretty bleak. The year before was really bad because we were struggling, and the house went into foreclosure a couple of times, and that was bleak.
That is scary. Yeah.
But I hate to say this, but it was all an illusion. We thought we had problems, but the family was healthy. We were all together.
Yeah.
The Woodside house, in the broad scheme of things, didn't matter.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of times you just have to get your head wrapped around what are the important things in life and what are the non-important things.
Just having your kids safe and healthy was what you focused on. It was important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then on the flip side of that, Nolan, what's been the proudest moment? One of the proudest moments?
Oh, wow. That's a real hard one. I don't know.
You could choose a few.
What?
You could choose a few if there's not just one.
It's actually not the way my brain works. Like, I can think about what will be my proudest moment when I do certain things and, my goals. But the stuff that I've accomplished, it's kind of, okay, yeah, done that. I really enjoy
do both of those. What was one accomplishment you had that you had that goal and you had it set and you finally hit it? And then what's the next?
I won the Transpac in 1983.
What was that?
I won the Transpac. It was a sailing race, Los Angeles to Hawaii, and I won that puppy. And 2 years before, I went on the race just kind of as a participant, and then when I was out in the middle of the Pacific, I said, in 2 years I'm going to win this puppy.
Yeah,
and I did.
Any business related ones that you had your sights set on?
Well, hitting 250 Chuck E. Cheeses was one.
Yeah.
Selling. Gosh, I don't know. Yeah.
What's next? You said you have big goals still.
Oh, I really want to positively change education. I think that our education is totally mismatched with today's technology.
Yeah.
I mean, our kids are so much brighter. They have so much more multitasking ability, batch processed. The classroom should be abolished. There should be no classes. There should be no, the concept of grades is wrong. There should be no grades and no grades. People should enter school, travel at their own speed, focus on their own interests, and quit when they want to get a job.
Yeah.
You know, or move into apprenticeships. It should be, there shouldn't be this broad link between somebody who's in school and somebody who's working, because we need to be lifelong learners as well. And so I think life needs to be more of an amalgam of the educational self and that. And I believe that there's so many ways you can learn that you don't want to have it be so stilted and pedantic.
Yeah, I like that. And for someone with kids, anyone with kids, where should someone start? You know, because they are in this system. Where should someone start with that?
I know, and you know, and it's hard.
Besides Brainrush, where else?
Yeah, Brainrush and a lot of the other stuff. What? But you know, so the biggest thing, there are hours and hours and hours of boredom in a classroom, because you know, lecture is just the wrong way to give information.
Right. Yeah.
And what is being crushed is enthusiasm for learning.
Yeah.
You know, kids don't know the difference between learning and school. They think they're the same. No, they're not. School is boring. Learning is fun.
Right.
and you really want to have these other constructs developed. I mean, creativity. If you look at all the statistics, we're training creativity out of people.
Right.
And it's just anyway, I could go on and on. This puppy.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm wondering, where someone should start. Like, let's say you have kids, they're just entering school, or they're already in school. Where should people start? Because they're in the system. So how do you get them on track?
I would be less worried about the system in some ways. I took the kids out of school when we went to Europe.
Yeah.
Homeschooled.
Yeah.
And using the museums around the world as sort of a background.
Yeah.
You know, what better way to learn about World War I and World War II than the British War Museum?
Right.
What better way to learn about physics than going through the Science and Industry Museum?
Sure.
And you know, what better? I mean, and some of the museums and that in Scandinavia and Germany.
Yeah.
So, just being, you know, on the location of the Battle of the Bulge and talking about what was happening, and they were coming over this ridge, and
you could really visualize that. Yeah.
You can visualize, and so it becomes contextual learning, which is always better.
Yeah.
And I think that my kids have all been very well. I've been willing to take the kids out of school at the drop of a hat. Like, I would always take one of the kids with me on my business trips. You know, and when they were 12, they'd get to come to Europe with me, because, you know, sometimes they'd have to stay in the hotel, but most of the time I'd take them right to the business trips.
Yeah.
You know, sit in the negotiations and that. And I know that one time I was taking the kids one of my boys to Japan with me, and they didn't know quite what to think about it. They thought that maybe he spoke Japanese and was a spy or something like that. And I said, no, I just want him to know what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, what my life is.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my attitude, is that if there's something more interesting going on in school, let's go do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Nolan, This has been fantastic. I really appreciate it. I know you have another appointment to get to. Where should we point people towards, and what's some final words we should leave them with?
Brainrush.com.
Yeah.
NolanBushnell.com.
Yeah.
My website. At Nolan Bushnell is my Twitter.
Yeah.
And I don't Twitter as much as I should, but I do when I think I have something to say.
Yeah.
And if you're seeing this from Australia, I'm going to be in Australia giving a speech at the end of next month. I'm going to be in Norway a week before that, giving a speech, and up in Trondheim. And I'm building some really good stuff, and you'll be able to download some new apps that'll be fun to play as well as very learning.
Yeah. Any final words? What people should get out of this? I know I love the ending of your book when you talk about what you told Steve Jobs when he was asking about Pixar.
Yeah, just do it. Just
action. Yeah,
action.
Just act.
Just act.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like Nike.
Yeah.
Change your life. Do different things. Mix it up. Every time I try something new and different, it engages me in a very powerful way.
Yeah.
And it turns out that there's some good brain science behind that. And plus, when you do different things, you create new dendrites and build your brain. You'll actually get smarter.
Yeah. Nolan, thank you. I really appreciate it. Fantastic.
Good fun.
Awesome.
Thank you. Bye now. Let me move my screen so that I'm looking at you instead off to the side.
Sure. You're so distinguished with the pipe and everything.
It's my luck.
Like Masterpiece Theater.
I'm working on an app that is. Have you played The Room or Room 2, which is on the iPad?
No, I haven't.
It's a sort of a room escape kind of thing on an app, and I'm doing one that overlays a knowledge of electricity. So once you escape the room, you understand the basics of Ohm's law.
For Brainrush.
Huh?
For Brainrush? Is it for Brainrush?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. But I still like to design games.
Yes. So do you have like an inventor's like Thomas Edison space like behind you? I see a bunch of electronic, there's light bulbs, what's behind you?
It is my cave. It's my kids said that if I wanted to, I've got enough parts here to build a space shuttle. I guess I could turn a little more light on to if you'd like to sort of see a little more of it.
That works, yeah.
It's got all kinds of
Oh, this is amazing.
Stuff there. Tools.
Wow, you could build a space shuttle. What is that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's I've always had a cave.
Yeah.
And in high school and what have you, my bedroom was in the basement, and I had it turned into a workshop and a lab, and my sisters were all afraid to come downstairs, just afraid they'd get electrocuted.
They probably would. Yeah. I expect nothing less from you, I guess. What's a fun fact about you most people don't know? I've watched numerous interviews, videos of you. What's something people don't know?
Oh, I don't know. I think there are a few things. I'm a big punster.
Oh, you are? Okay.
And my kids, I always start with a joke of some sort. I snowboard.
Really? Okay. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Well, one of the rules in my family is that you have to be an elegant beginner.
Okay.
That everybody, there are a million things that you don't know, and whenever you start on something that you don't know, you're a beginner.
Yeah.
And you have to learn to do that with grace and aplomb and not get so full of yourself. And so we were skiing, and the boys were snowboarding, and they said, "Dad, come on, you got to learn how to snowboard." I was 55 years old. And all the people who were snowboarding are all in their teens and early 20s and what
Right.
have you. And of course, they started jazzing me about being an elegant beginner. So I said, okay, I'll learn how to snowboard. And I learned how, and it's fun. And when I'm with them, I snowboard. And when I'm with my wife, I ski.
Nice. And then, I mean, another fun fact I looked up that I don't know if most people know, you have 8 kids, and that's remarkable. That's probably one of the most remarkable feats you have out of everything.
Yeah, and it's actually I like to say that it's my best accomplishment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like like Brent and those guys. They all grew up with projects. We were a building tinkering
I'm
family,
sure. Yeah.
and always had a metal shop and a wood shop and chemistry lab and electronics lab available to them.
Yeah. That's fantastic.